The bell above the door rang 3 times in a row, sharp and fast, like someone outside could not decide whether to knock or simply walk in. Daniel Hart did not look up right away. He was halfway through his sandwich, elbows on the counter of the Maple Diner, his mind somewhere between the broken transmission waiting for him at the garage and the silence of his apartment, which had grown louder every year he lived in it alone. Then he heard small feet, 3 sets of them, moving together, stopping together, like they had practiced it. He turned. 3 girls stood in the doorway, identical down to the part in their hair, wearing yellow raincoats even though the sky outside was clear and blue. They looked at him the way people look at something they have been searching for a long time, the way you look at a face you have only seen in photographs. "Hello, sir," the girl in the middle said. Her voice was calm, too calm for an 8-year-old standing in front of a stranger. Daniel set down his sandwich. "Hello," he said carefully, glancing past them for a parent, an adult, anyone who might explain why 3 children had walked into a diner and aimed their full attention directly at him. There was no adult behind them. The girl on the left tilted her head and studied his forearm, where his sleeve had ridden up past his elbow, her eyes fixed on the small tattoo there, an anchor with a name curled beneath it in faded blue ink. "That's the same one," she said. Daniel frowned. "The same what?" "The tattoo," the girl said. "Our mom has that exact one. Same letters, same spot." For a moment, the diner kept moving around him, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the coffee machine, a radio playing low behind the counter, but Daniel Hart stopped completely, the way a clock stops when the battery finally gives out. He looked down at his own arm, at the word he had stopped noticing years ago, because he had trained himself not to look at it. Claire. The name was written in handwriting that was not his own, because she had gotten the tattoo too, the same week, the same shop, the 2 of them laughing about how foolish it was to put a name on your skin when you were only 26, and certain it would last forever. It had not lasted. She had left without an explanation 9 years ago, and he had spent most of that time convincing himself it did not matter anymore. "Where is your mom?" he asked, and his own voice sounded strange to him, too tight, like it belonged to someone standing just behind him. The 3rd girl, the quiet one, finally spoke. "She told us to find the man with the anchor," she said. "She said we would know him by the tattoo." Daniel felt the floor tilt slightly, though nothing in the room had actually moved. "What's her name?" he asked. "Your mom. What's her name?" The girls exchanged a look between themselves, a silent conversation that happened too fast for him to follow, and then the middle one answered. "Claire," she said. "Claire Donovan." The name hit him harder than he expected, even though he had already guessed it, even though some part of him had known the second he saw the tattoo cross the girl's mind. Hearing it said out loud, in a child's voice, in a diner on a Tuesday afternoon, made it real in a way that memory alone never had. "How old are you?" he asked, though he was already doing the math in his head, already counting backward through years he had spent telling himself there was nothing left to count. 8, the smallest one said. "We're triplets." 8 years old. 9 years since Claire disappeared from his life without a single word, without a letter, without a number that worked when he tried to call it. 8 years old meant the math was close enough that his hands had started to shake slightly against the counter, close enough that he set his coffee cup down before he dropped it. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Can you take me to her?" The girls did not answer right away. Instead, the one in the middle reached into the pocket of her raincoat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft at the edges, like it had been carried for days, opened and closed many times by small hands that were not quite sure what they were supposed to do with it. "She said only give this to you if you remembered the tattoo," the girl said. "She said if you didn't remember, we should just leave." Daniel took the paper with fingers that did not feel entirely like his own. He unfolded it slowly, aware that the waitress behind the counter had stopped wiping down the surface and was now watching the whole scene with open curiosity, aware that 2 other customers had turned in their seats. The paper held only a few lines, written in handwriting he recognized instantly, the same loops and slants from notes she used to leave him 9 years ago, taped to the bathroom mirror, tucked into his jacket pockets before work. "If you are reading this, it means our girls found you," it said. "I am sorry it took this long. There is so much I should have told you. Please come. I do not have much time left to explain it myself." Below that was an address, written in smaller letters, like she had hesitated before adding it. Daniel read it twice, then a 3rd time, The words did not change, no matter how many times he looked at them, but something in his chest kept shifting anyway, like the ground beneath a building settling after years of standing still. "Is she sick?" he asked, looking up at the girls. The middle one nodded, slow and careful, the way children nod when they have been told something heavy and are not sure how to carry it. "Grandma says she's very sick," she said. "She doesn't want us to be scared, but we know." Daniel stood up from the counter so fast that his stool scraped loudly against the floor. He reached for his wallet, dropped enough money on the counter to cover the meal twice over without bothering to count it, and looked at the three identical faces in front of him, faces that held pieces of his own features mixed with pieces that were entirely Claire's, faces that had walked into a diner on the strength of nothing but a child's memory of a story their mother must have told them many times. "Can you take me to her?" he asked again. "Right now?" The girls turned toward the door together, the same way they had entered, 3 sets of feet moving as one, and the middle girl looked back at him over her shoulder. "That's why we came," she said. "We're not supposed to go home without you." Daniel followed them out of the diner into the bright afternoon, his heart pounding in a way it had not pounded in years, not from fear exactly, though there was fear in it, but from the strange and sudden collision of 2 lives that had been moving apart for 9 years, and were now, in the space of a few minutes, slamming back together. Outside, parked at the curb, was an old silver car with the engine still running, and behind the wheel sat a woman he did not recognize at first, gray hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp and watchful in the rearview mirror. The moment she saw him approaching with the girls, her expression changed, hardened, like she had been bracing herself for this exact moment and had still not decided if she was ready for it. "Get in," she said through the open window, her voice clipped and tense. "We don't have much time." Daniel hesitated only a second before opening the back door and sliding in beside the 3 girls, who buckled themselves into their seats with the quiet efficiency of children who had done this many times before, who were used to riding in cars with grown-ups who did not explain themselves. As the car pulled away from the curb, Daniel looked down at the folded note still clutched in his hand, the ink slightly smudged now from his own fingers, and felt the full weight of 9 missing years pressing down on him all at once. He did not know yet what waited for him at the address written in Claire's handwriting. He did not know how sick she really was, or what she meant by not having much time, or why she had waited 8 years to send their daughters to find him instead of coming herself. He only knew that whatever explanation existed, it was about to change everything he thought he understood about his own life. The woman behind the wheel, who he would soon learn was Claire's mother, Eleanor, kept glancing at him in the mirror as she drove, her jaw tight, her knuckles pale against the steering wheel, like she had a long list of things she wanted to say to him, and had decided, for now, to say none of them. The girls sat quietly beside him, watching him with the same careful attention they had shown in the diner, 3 pairs of eyes studying the stranger who was apparently their father, trying to decide what to make of him now that he was finally here. Daniel looked out the window at the town passing by, streets he had driven 1,000 times suddenly feeling unfamiliar, and understood, somewhere beneath the shock, that he was no longer simply Daniel Hart, mechanic, single man, owner of an apartment with an unused toothbrush in the drawer. He was about to become someone else entirely, and there was no controlling how fast or how hard that change was coming. The drive did not take long, only a handful of minutes through streets Daniel knew by heart, past the hardware store where he used to buy parts for his truck, past the school the girls apparently attended, judging by the backpacks wedged beside him on the seat. Nobody spoke. The radio stayed off. The only sound was the engine and the occasional rustle of the girls shifting in their seats, glancing at him, glancing away, glancing back again, like he was a puzzle they had only half solved. Eleanor pulled the car into the narrow alley behind a small shop with a faded sign, reading Doyle's Flowers, the paint chipped at the corners from years of weather. She killed the engine and sat for a moment without moving, her hands still gripping the wheel, before finally turning to look at Daniel directly for the first time since he had gotten into the car. "You have questions," she said. It was not a question itself, more an acknowledgement of the obvious. "More than you probably want to answer," Daniel said. "Probably," Eleanor agreed, and something in her voice carried both exhaustion and an old, stubborn anger that had clearly not faded with time. "Girls, go inside and wash up. I need to speak with him alone." The triplets climbed out of the car without argument. though the smallest one looked back at Daniel one more time before disappearing through the shop's back door, like she wanted to make sure he was still real, still there, not something that would vanish the moment she stopped watching him. When the door clicked shut behind them, Eleanor turned fully in her seat. "I owe you an explanation," she said, "and I'm not proud of all of it." Daniel said nothing, waiting, his hands resting on his knees, because he did not trust them not to shake if he let them rest anywhere else. "Claire tried to find you," Eleanor began. "After she found out she was pregnant, she wrote to you, more than once." "I never got anything," Daniel said. "I know that now," Eleanor said. "Your address had changed. Your father passed that same year, and you moved out of the house you two used to talk about, and none of the letters reached you. Claire didn't know that. She thought you were ignoring her on purpose." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. He remembered that year clearly, the worst one of his life, until perhaps this exact afternoon, burying his father, selling the house because he could not afford to keep it, and could not stand to live in it either, moving twice in 6 months while he tried to rebuild some kind of stable ground beneath himself. He had not thought to update anyone who might be looking for him because as far as he knew, nobody was looking. "There's more," Eleanor continued, and her jaw tightened, like the next part cost her something to say. "Someone told her you'd been seen with another woman. A photograph, actually. Claire believed it. I believed it too, at the time, because the person who showed it to us had no reason that we knew of to lie." "Who was it?" Daniel asked. "Doesn't matter now," Eleanor said. "She moved away years ago. What matters is that the photograph was old, taken before you two had even met. Someone passed it off as recent because they wanted Claire to leave town. Leave you, leave everything behind. We didn't find out the truth until much later, and by then, Claire was already gone, already raising 3 girls on her own, in a city 3 hours from here, already convinced that reaching out again would only get her hurt a second time." Daniel sat with that for a long moment, watching dust drift through the narrow shaft of sunlight coming through the alley window, trying to absorb 9 years of silence collapsing down into a handful of sentences that explained almost everything and forgave almost nothing. "You knew where I was," he said finally. "At some point, you must have known." "I found out 2 years ago," Eleanor admitted. "Claire was already sick by then, not as sick as she is now, but sick enough that she started thinking about things differently, about what the girls would need if she wasn't here to give it to them." "And you didn't tell me?" "No," Eleanor said, and to her credit, she did not look away from him when she said it. "I told myself it wasn't my place. The truth is, I was still angry. Angry that you'd let her go so easily, even though I now understand you never had a real chance to fight for her in the first place. Anger doesn't always wait for facts before it decides where to point itself." Daniel exhaled slowly, the air leaving his chest in a long, unsteady stream. "How sick is she?" he asked. Eleanor's composure cracked then, just slightly, just enough for Daniel to see the fear she had been holding beneath the sharpness the entire drive. "Her heart," she said. "It's a condition she's had since she was a teenager, something that was manageable for years with medication, until it wasn't anymore. The doctors gave her a timeline 8 months ago. She's outlived it twice already, mostly out of stubbornness, but the last few weeks have been harder. That's why she finally agreed to let the girls find you. She didn't want to die without you knowing they existed." The word die landed in the small space of the car like something physical, something Daniel could almost feel pressing against his chest. "I need to see her," he said. "You will," Eleanor said, "but not today. She's resting, and the doctor doesn't want her overwhelmed. Tomorrow morning I'll take you to the hospital myself." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to demand they go right now, this minute, but something in Eleanor's expression told him this was not a decision open for negotiation, and pushing against it would accomplish nothing, except wasting the limited goodwill he had only just begun to earn back. "Can I at least spend time with the girls?" he asked. "Get to know them while I wait?" For the first time since they had met, something close to warmth flickered across Eleanor's face. "That," she said, "is exactly what Claire was hoping you'd ask." They went inside together, through the back door into a kitchen that smelled like cut flowers and old coffee, and Daniel found the triplets sitting at a small wooden table, 3 matching cups of juice in front of them, watching the doorway for his arrival, like they had been counting the seconds since the girls had been sent away. "This is Lily," Eleanor said, gesturing to the girl who had spoken first in the diner. Ivy is the one who found the tattoo first, and Hazel is the quiet one. Though don't let that fool you. She usually has the most to say once she decides to say it. Daniel sat down across from them, feeling, for the first time in 9 years, like the empty chair at his own kitchen table back home had finally been explained. "Can I ask you something?" he said. The girls nodded in unison. "What did your mom tell you about me?" Lily was the one to answer, her small hands wrapped around her juice cup. "She said you were the kindest man she ever knew," she said. "She said you used to fix things that other people gave up on. Cars, mostly, but other things too. She said you'd probably want to fix things for us, if you ever got the chance." Daniel had to look down at the table for a moment, before he trusted himself to speak again. Ivy, watching him closely, slid her hand across the table, and rested it lightly on top of his. A small, and entirely unself-conscious gesture, the kind only children manage without feeling strange about it. "We're glad you remembered the tattoo," she said. "I remembered everything," Daniel said quietly. "I just didn't know where to find any of it again." Hazel, true to what Eleanor had said about her, had been silent through most of the conversation, watching Daniel with an intensity that seemed too old for her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, almost businesslike, the voice of a child who had learned early to manage difficult information without flinching. "Mom is going to be okay, right?" she asked. Daniel looked at Eleanor across the kitchen, saw the warning in her eyes, the silent plea not to make promises that might not hold. He looked back at Hazel, at 3 identical faces waiting for an answer that mattered more than anything else he might ever say to them. "I don't know," he said honestly, because he had already decided, in the space of that single afternoon, that he was not going to be a man who lied to these girls, not even to spare them, not even once. "But I know I'm going to be here for whatever happens. All of you. I'm not going anywhere again." The girls exchanged another one of their silent looks, that strange shorthand Triplet seemed to share, and something in the room settled, a tension easing just slightly, though Daniel understood it would not stay eased for long. Eleanor insisted he stay for dinner, more out of practicality than warmth, since sending him back to an empty apartment after the day he had just had seemed almost cruel. The girls set the table with a kind of practiced coordination that told Daniel this was not new to them. Plates passed hand to hand, forks counted out 3 times before a 4th was added, without anyone needing to ask. "They've been doing chores like this since they were 5, Eleanor said quietly, watching them work. Claire didn't have much choice. Some days her energy runs out before the day does. Daniel watched the girls move around the small kitchen, Lily stirring a pot of soup on the stove with more confidence than most adults he knew, Ivy folding paper napkins into careful triangles, Hazel quietly checking that each chair was pushed in evenly before declaring the table ready. There was an order to it, a kind of resilience built into small routines, and Daniel understood, watching them, that these girls had learned early how to hold a household together when their mother could not always do it herself. Over dinner, he learned small details that felt enormous to him, things a father should have known years earlier, and was only now hearing for the first time. Lily was afraid of thunderstorms but pretended she wasn't, for the sake of her sisters. Ivy collected rocks from every place she visited and kept them in a shoebox under her bed, sorted by color. Hazel had taught herself to read 2 years early, because she didn't like being told stories secondhand when she could find out the ending herself. "What about you?" Lily asked him at one point, midway through her bowl of soup. "What were you like when you were our age?" Daniel thought about it honestly before answering, aware that whatever he said now would become part of how they understood him going forward. "Quiet," he said. "Liked taking things apart more than I liked playing with them whole. My dad used to get frustrated because I'd take apart his radio just to see how the sound came out of it, and then I couldn't always get it back together right." "Sounds like Ivy," Hazel said, deadpan, and Ivy threw a balled-up napkin at her sister's head, which led to a brief eruption of laughter around the table, the first easy, unguarded moment of the entire day. Daniel laughed too, surprising himself with how natural it felt, how quickly something in his chest loosened that had been tight since the diner. For a few minutes, sitting in a cramped kitchen above a flower shop with 3 daughters he had known for less than 6 hours, he forgot entirely about the fear sitting underneath everything. The fact that the woman who had given him these 3 small miracles was lying in a hospital bed somewhere, her heart slowly losing a fight no amount of love could fully win. After dinner, Eleanor sent the girls up to get ready for bed, and Daniel found himself alone in the kitchen with her for a moment, both of them lingering over the dishes, neither quite ready to end the day. "They like you," Eleanor said, not quite looking at him as she dried a plate. "Faster than I expected." "I don't know how to be what they need," Daniel admitted. "I've had one day to learn 3 entire people." "Nobody knows how to do this," Eleanor said. "Claire didn't know either, not at first. You learn it by doing it badly a few times until you do it less badly. That's the whole secret." Daniel almost smiled at that, though the weight in his chest didn't fully lift. "Tell me about her," he said. "About what these years were actually like. Not the easy version. The real one." Eleanor set the plate down and was quiet for a long moment, gathering whatever it was she had decided, somewhere over the course of the day, that he had earned the right to hear. "She worked 2 jobs until the girls were 4, Eleanor said. Cleaning offices at night, working the register at a pharmacy during the day, sleeping in whatever hours fit between. I helped where I could, but I had my own health problems back then, and money was tight for both of us. She never once said your name with anger. Not really. Not even when she believed the worst about you. Mostly she just stopped saying it at all, which I think was harder for her than anger would have been. Why didn't she come find me herself, once she knew the truth about the photograph? Pride at first, Eleanor said. Then fear, once the sickness got worse. She didn't want you meeting her only to watch her get sicker in front of you. She wanted you to have a choice that wasn't shaped by pity." "It was never going to be pity," Daniel said quietly. "I believe that now," Eleanor said. "I'm not sure I would have believed it 9 years ago." They finished the dishes in silence after that, the kind of silence that did not need filling, and Eleanor showed him up to the small guest room above the shop, where the framed photographs on the wall told a story he was only now becoming part of. 3 small girls growing year by year in pictures that did not include him. Birthdays and school photos, and one image of all 3 of them asleep in a single bed, during what looked like a thunderstorm, tangled together like puppies. That night, in the small guest room above the flower shop, Daniel lay awake staring at a ceiling stained faintly brown from some old water leak, replaying every detail of the day. He thought about Claire as she had been 9 years ago, 26 years old, laughing too loudly at her own jokes, stubborn in a way that used to frustrate him, and now felt like the only thing keeping her alive against doctors' predictions. He thought about 3 letters that never reached him, about a photograph that lied, about a daughter named Hazel, who had asked him a question he could not honestly answer yes to. He thought about the years he had spent believing Claire simply stopped wanting him, when the truth was so much more complicated, so much sadder, so much harder to forgive anyone for, including himself. Around midnight, his phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the dark room. It was a text from Eleanor's number, though he suspected it was Eleanor sending it rather than anyone else in the house. "The hospital called," it read. "Claire's condition has changed. We need to leave at 5 in the morning instead of waiting. I'm sorry. I know this is fast." Daniel sat up in the narrow bed, his heart pounding the same way it had pounded in the diner that afternoon, except now the fear had sharpened into something closer to panic, something that left no room for sleep, no room for anything except counting down the hours until 5 in the morning, when he would finally see Claire again for the first time in 9 years. The drive to the hospital began before the sun had fully risen, the sky outside still holding on to traces of night along its edges, purple bleeding slowly into gray. Daniel sat in the passenger seat this time, Eleanor driving with the same tight grip on the wheel as the day before, the girls left behind at the flower shop with a neighbor who had apparently helped out in moments like this more times than anyone wanted to count. "They wanted to come," Eleanor said, eyes fixed on the road. "I told them not yet. Let me find out what we're walking into first." Daniel said nothing, watching the streetlights blur past the window, his hands folded tightly in his lap to keep them from shaking. He had not slept, not really, just drifted in and out of something close to sleep, his mind replaying the same handful of moments over and over. The hospital rose up out of the early morning fog like something built specifically to remind people how small they were, all glass and steel under a sky that had not yet decided whether it wanted to be morning or still night. Eleanor parked in a structure attached to the main building and led him through doors that hissed open automatically, down hallways that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, toward an elevator that took them up to the 5th floor. A man was waiting outside the room when they arrived, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed like he had also not slept. arms crossed over his chest in a way that made his opinion of the situation clear before he said a single word. "Patrick," Eleanor said. "This is Daniel." Patrick's eyes moved over Daniel slowly, assessing him the way you might assess something you had heard stories about for years without ever expecting to actually meet. "So you're him," he said, "the one she's been writing letters to in her head for almost a decade." "I didn't know," Daniel said. "I want you to understand that. I never got any of it." "I've heard the explanation," Patrick said, his voice flat. "Doesn't change the years she spent raising 3 kids alone, while you went on with your life like nothing happened." "Patrick," Eleanor said sharply. "Not now." Patrick held Daniel's gaze a moment longer, some old anger simmering just beneath the surface, the kind that comes from watching someone you love suffer and needing somewhere to point the blame even after the facts complicate the picture. Then he exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders, though not all of it. "She's been asking for you since midnight," he said finally. "Don't waste whatever time she has left arguing with me about it." He stepped aside from the door, and Daniel understood that whatever resentment Patrick carried, he was not going to let it stand between Claire and the moment she had clearly been waiting 9 years for. Eleanor touched Daniel's arm before he could go in. "Be gentle," she said. "Her heart can't take much excitement right now, good or bad." Daniel nodded, though he was not entirely sure his own heart could take much excitement either, and pushed open the door. The room was dim, the blinds half drawn against the rising sun, and the steady beep of a heart monitor filled the silence with a rhythm that felt both reassuring and terrifying at once. Proof that she was still here, still fighting, but also a constant reminder of exactly how fragile that fight had become. Claire lay propped up against a stack of pillows, thinner than he remembered, her dark hair shorter now, threaded with strands of gray that had not been there 9 years ago, an intravenous line taped to the back of her hand. But her eyes, when she opened them and found him standing in the doorway, were exactly the same, sharp and warm at once, the same eyes that used to find him across a crowded room and make the whole room disappear. "You came," she said, her voice quieter than he remembered, worn down by months of illness, but unmistakably hers. "Of course I came," Daniel said, crossing the room to sit in the chair beside her bed, close enough that he could take her hand without either of them having to reach far for it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was too much to say and not enough strength in the room to say all of it at once, so they simply looked at each other, 9 years of separate lives passing silently between them in the space of a held breath. "I should have found you sooner," Claire said finally, "before I got sick, before there was a reason to need you instead of just wanting you. I should have updated my address," Daniel said, attempting something close to a smile, though it came out crooked. "Then maybe none of this distance would have happened in the first place." Claire laughed, a small, breathless sound that seemed to cost her more effort than laughter should. "Trust you to find the practical angle on a love story gone wrong." "It's what I do," Daniel said. "Find the broken part. Try to fix it." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious, more urgent, like she was aware of how little time she had to say the things that actually mattered. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to actually think about it before you answer. Not just say yes because I'm lying in a hospital bed." "Ask me," Daniel said. "The girls," she said. "If something happens to me, I need to know they'll have you, not just visits, not just a man who shows up on weekends because he feels guilty. I need them to have a father who is actually there, every day, the way I tried to be." Daniel felt the weight of the question settle into him fully, understanding that this was not a small ask, not something to answer lightly in a moment charged with emotion and fear. He thought of Lily's quiet confidence, Ivy's hand resting on his that afternoon in the kitchen, Hazel's steady, unflinching question about whether her mother would be okay. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, "not this time. Whatever happens with you, whatever the doctors say, I'm staying, for all 3 of them. I promise you that." Claire studied his face for a long moment, searching for whatever certainty she needed to find there, and whatever she saw seemed to satisfy something in her, because the tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and she let out a long breath that sounded almost like relief. "There's paperwork," she said. "Eleanor has it ready, establishing you as their father, legally, not just by blood. I wanted to do it the right way, in case things move faster than we'd like." "We'll do it today," Daniel said. "Whatever you need." They talked for nearly an hour after that, filling in pieces of the 9 years apart in fragments. Claire telling him about late nights with 3 crying infants and no one to share the exhaustion with. Daniel telling her about the years he spent fixing cars and avoiding anything that looked too much like a future. Both of them circling around the apology, neither one fully needed to give, because the truth, once it was out in the open between them, made blame feel like a smaller thing than either of them had been carrying it as. It was nearly 9 in the morning when the steady rhythm of the heart monitor changed. It happened fast, the beeping accelerating into a rapid, urgent pattern that pulled Daniel's attention instantly away from Claire's face and toward the screen beside her bed, numbers climbing in a way that made his stomach drop even before he understood exactly what they meant. Claire's hand tightened around his, her breath suddenly shallow, her eyes wide with something that looked less like fear and more like grim recognition, like this was a moment she had braced herself for many times before. "Claire," Daniel said, his voice rising with panic he could not fully control. "Claire, talk to me." "Get the nurse," she managed, her voice strained. "Now." Daniel was on his feet and at the door before he had fully processed moving, calling into the hallway for help, and within seconds, the room filled with people in scrubs, a doctor moving past him toward the bed, a nurse pulling him gently but firmly back toward the doorway, voices overlapping in urgent, clinical language he could barely follow. Eleanor appeared beside him in the hallway, gripping his arm tightly, her face pale, and Patrick stood just behind her, all the earlier hostility drained out of him entirely, replaced by the same raw fear that had taken hold of everyone in the corridor. "What's happening?" Daniel asked, though some part of him already understood, watching through the narrow gap in the door as the medical team worked around Claire's bed with quick, practiced urgency. "Her heart," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "It's been threatening this for weeks. We knew it could happen. We just didn't know when." Daniel stood frozen in the hallway, watching the door, listening to the rapid, clipped instructions passing between doctors and nurses on the other side of it, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost cruel in its timing, that he had been given back 9 years of his life in the space of a single day, only to risk losing the most important part of it again, before he had even finished saying everything he needed to say. Daniel paced the small waiting area outside Claire's room for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall insisted only 40 minutes had passed since the alarms first sounded. Eleanor sat in one of the stiff plastic chairs, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her lips moving occasionally in something that might have been prayer, or might have simply been counting, a habit Daniel suspected she had developed over many similar waits in many similar hallways. Patrick stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out at the parking structure below without really seeing it. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all of its earlier edge. "She's coded twice before," he said quietly. "Once last year, once about 6 weeks ago. Both times they brought her back." "And the third time?" Daniel asked, though he immediately regretted the question, watching it land on Patrick's face like a blow. "There's no rule that says there's a limit," Patrick said, "but everybody in this hallway is thinking it anyway." The doctor emerged almost an hour later, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Whitman, whose expression gave little away until she actually began speaking, a professional habit Daniel suspected she had cultivated, specifically so families would not read disaster into her face, before she had a chance to explain the facts herself. "She's stable," Dr. Whitman said, and the relief that swept through the small group was almost physical, Eleanor's shoulders dropping several inches at once, Patrick exhaling like he had been holding his breath for the better part of an hour. Her heart went into an irregular rhythm. "We were able to correct it, but I won't pretend this wasn't serious. Her heart is weaker than it was even a month ago." "Can we see her?" Daniel asked. "Briefly," Dr. Whitman said. "She's asking for the girls. I'd recommend bringing them, if you think they can handle it. Sometimes seeing for themselves that she's okay does more good than any amount of reassurance from adults." Eleanor went to call the neighbor watching the girls while Daniel sat down heavily in the chair she had vacated, his legs suddenly unsteady beneath him, the alarm of the last hour draining out of him all at once and leaving behind something closer to exhaustion than relief. Patrick sat down beside him, an unspoken truce settling over the space between them. "I owe you an apology," Patrick said after a moment. "Earlier, the way I came at you." "You don't," Daniel said. "From where you were standing, I had it coming." "Maybe," Patrick said, But I watched you in that hallway just now. The way you reacted when the monitor started going. That wasn't a man pretending to care because it looked good. That was real. Daniel didn't answer right away, turning the words over, surprised by how much they mattered coming from someone who had greeted him with open suspicion only hours earlier. I meant what I told her, Daniel said finally, about staying, about the girls. I don't know how to be a father to 3 8-year-olds I met yesterday, but I know how to learn things I don't know how to do. I've been doing that my whole life. Patrick nodded slowly, something settling between them that wasn't quite friendship yet, but was no longer hostility either. The girls are going to need that, he said, more than they realize right now. Claire's been the center of their whole world. If anything happens to her, that center disappears unless somebody steps into it fast. The girls arrived an hour later, brought by Eleanor's neighbor, a kind-faced older woman who hovered protectively near the waiting area while the triplets were led, one at a time at the nurse's careful instruction, into Claire's room. Daniel watched through the doorway as Lily climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, careful of the wires and tubes, resting her head gently against her mother's shoulder. Ivy held Claire's hand the way she had held Daniel's the day before, the same unself-conscious gesture of comfort. Hazel stood a little apart at first, studying the machines surrounding her mother with the same serious attention she gave everything, before finally stepping closer and asking, in a voice steady enough to surprise even the nurse standing nearby, exactly what each machine did and whether it hurt. Claire answered every question patiently, her voice weak but warm, and Daniel, watching from the doorway, understood that whatever fear lived underneath the surface for all of them, Claire had spent years building a foundation of honesty with her daughters that would carry them through even this. Later that afternoon, once the girls had been settled into a small family room down the hall with coloring books a kind nurse had found for them, Eleanor approached Daniel with a folder of papers tucked under her arm. "The hospital has a social worker who handles situations like this," she said. "Claire arranged to meet with her weeks ago, before any of this happened today, to start the legal process of naming you as the girl's father. I think, given what just happened, we should move quickly." "What does quickly look like?" Daniel asked. "A paternity test to make it official in the eyes of the court," Eleanor said. "Then guardianship paperwork, in case Claire isn't able to make decisions for the girls at some point. It's not simple, and it's not fast, but it's faster if we start now instead of waiting." The social worker, a brisk, efficient woman named Margaret Lowell, met with Daniel in a small office near the hospital's administrative wing later that evening. She explained the process in clear, practical terms. A paternity test that could be completed quickly using a simple cheek swab, results back within a few days, followed by a legal filing that would formally establish him as the girl's father and allow him to be included in medical and educational decisions going forward. "I have to ask," Margaret said, studying him carefully across her desk, "given the suddenness of all this, whether you're prepared for what comes next. 3 children is a significant responsibility under any circumstances. 3 children who may soon lose their mother, while you yourself are adjusting to fatherhood for the first time, is considerably more than that." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "I've had 1 day to think about it," he said, "but I've also had 9 years without knowing they existed, and not 1 second of that felt easier than today does. I want this. I want them. Whatever it takes to make it official, I'll do it." Margaret studied him a moment longer, something in his answer apparently satisfying whatever professional instinct she relied on in moments like this, and nodded. "Then let's get the paperwork started," she said. "I'll need you back here tomorrow morning for the test." That night, Daniel did not go back to the flower shop. Instead, at Eleanor's quiet insistence, he stayed at the hospital, sleeping in fits and starts in an uncomfortable chair beside Claire's bed, while she rested, waking each time the heart monitor's rhythm shifted even slightly, his body apparently no longer willing to fully relax, until he knew, beyond any doubt, that she was safe. Around 2 in the morning, Claire stirred and found him awake, watching her in the dim light filtering in from the hallway. "You should sleep," she said softly. "I will," Daniel said, "eventually." She studied him for a long moment, something thoughtful, and a little sad crossing her face. "I used to imagine this," she admitted. "In the early years when the girls were babies and I was exhausted all the time, I'd imagine you walking through the door, fixing something, making the house feel less like it was held together by nothing but my own stubbornness." "I wish I'd been there for all of it," Daniel said. "The exhausting parts too. Not just the easy version where I show up at the end. There's no easy version of any of this, Claire said. Not the past 9 years, and probably not whatever's coming next either. But I'm glad you're here for the part that's left, however much of it there is. Don't talk like there's a countdown, Daniel said, his voice rougher than he intended. There's always a countdown, Claire said gently. For everybody. Mine's just a little more obvious than most people's right now. Daniel reached for her hand again, holding it carefully, mindful of the line taped against her skin. Then we use whatever time there is, he said. Together. All of us. Claire smiled, faint but genuine, and closed her eyes again, drifting back toward sleep with her hand still resting in his, the steady, ordinary beep of the heart monitor, filling the quiet room like a kind of fragile promise. The paternity test came back 3 days later, though by then, nobody in the family had any real doubt about what it would say. Daniel sat beside Claire's bed when the results arrived, the social worker reading the confirmation aloud in clinical, unemotional language that somehow still managed to feel enormous in the small hospital room. 3 small girls listening from the foot of the bed with matching expressions of quiet satisfaction, like a fact they had already known and their hearts had simply been given the proper paperwork to match. It's official, Margaret said, closing the folder. Daniel Hart is legally recognized as the father of Lily, Ivy, and Hazel Donovan, effective today. Lily was the first to react, climbing up onto the bed to hug her mother, then turning to wrap her arms around Daniel's neck with a fierce, unrestrained joy that nearly knocked him off balance. Ivy and Hazel followed close behind, and for a moment, the small hospital room held something that felt, despite everything surrounding it, almost entirely like happiness. But even as Daniel held his daughters close, he caught Claire watching the scene with an expression that mixed joy and something heavier beneath it. A quiet awareness that the official paperwork now in place existed for a reason neither of them wanted to say out loud. A safety net being built, not for the family they hoped to become, but for the family Claire feared. Despite everything, she might not get to see grow up. Over the following 2 weeks, Claire's condition stabilized enough for the doctors to discuss discharge, though the conversation came wrapped in careful qualifications about home care, limited activity, and a hospice nurse who would visit several times a week to monitor her heart and manage her medication. Dr. Whitman was honest about what that meant, in the quiet, measured way she had clearly learned to deliver difficult information without crushing the people receiving it. Her heart isn't going to recover, she told Daniel privately, in the hallway outside Claire's room. We can manage her comfort and try to extend the time she has, but I want you prepared for the reality that the timeline we discussed weeks ago hasn't really changed. If anything, today reminded all of us how short it might be. Daniel absorbed the words the way he had absorbed everything else over the past 2 weeks, with a kind of grim, determined practicality that left little room for the grief trying to claw its way up underneath it. There would be time for that later, he told himself. Right now there was work to do. He spent his evenings, after visiting hours ended, preparing a life he had not known he needed to build until 11 days earlier. His old apartment, with its single unused toothbrush and its silence, was clearly not large enough or suited enough for 3 growing girls, so he found a small house 2 streets over from the flower shop, close enough that the girls could still walk to see their grandmother, close enough to the hospital that visits remained easy. He painted 3 bedrooms in colors the girls had chosen during a brief, exhausting, wonderful shopping trip that had left him with significantly less money and significantly more joy than he had expected. Lily chose a pale green, because it reminded her of the soup she liked to make. Ivy chose a deep blue, the color of the ocean she had only ever seen in pictures. Hazel chose plain white, then changed her mind 3 times before finally settling on a soft yellow that, she admitted quietly, matched the raincoats she and her sisters had been wearing the day they found him. Eleanor helped him assemble furniture in the evenings, the 2 of them working in companionable, mostly silent partnership that had replaced the wariness of their first meeting with something steadier, something built on shared purpose rather than shared history. Patrick stopped by more than once with tools Daniel didn't own and advice Daniel hadn't asked for but found useful anyway. The early hostility between them long since dissolved into something that resembled, if not quite friendship, then at least a shared determination to get this one thing right for Claire's sake. When Claire was finally discharged, 3 weeks after the diner, after the tattoo, after a single afternoon that had rearranged the entire architecture of Daniel's life, she came home not to her mother's flower shop, but to the small house Daniel had prepared. Settled into a bedroom on the ground floor so she would not need to manage stairs, surrounded by 3 daughters who refused to leave her side for more than a few minutes at a time, and a man who had spent 2 weeks learning, badly at first and then less badly, exactly what it meant to build a family out of nothing but love and borrowed time. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm Daniel could not have imagined 2 months earlier, a rhythm built around school mornings and hospice visits, around Claire's good days, when she insisted on sitting at the kitchen table while the girls did their homework, and her harder days, when she stayed in bed and the girls took turns reading to her from whatever book had captured their attention that week. Daniel learned to braid hair badly and then less badly, learned which of his daughters needed quiet reassurance and which needed to talk through their worries out loud until the worry shrank down to something manageable, learned that Hazel processed fear through questions and facts, that Ivy needed to be held more than she would ever admit to needing it, that Lily, despite being the one who had spoken first in the diner, was actually the one most likely to fall apart quietly where no one could see her doing it. He found her crying alone in the backyard one evening in early autumn, sitting on the back step with her knees pulled up to her chest, and sat down beside her without saying anything at first, giving her room to speak when she was ready, rather than pushing the moment before she could carry it. "I don't want her to go," Lily finally said, her voice small in the cooling evening air. "Neither do I," Daniel said honestly, "but I don't think wanting it hard enough is going to change what her heart can do." "Then what's the point of hoping?" Lily asked, looking up at him with an expression far too heavy for an 8-year-old's face. Daniel thought about the question carefully before answering, aware that whatever he said now would shape how she carried hope, or the loss of it, for years to come. "The point isn't that hoping fixes everything," he said. "The point is that hoping lets you love someone fully, right up until the very end, instead of pulling away early to protect yourself from the hurt. Your mom would rather have you close and hurting later than far away and safe now. I think that's true for most people who love each other." Lily leaned against his shoulder, and they sat together on the back step until the evening turned fully dark, neither of them needing to say anything else. Claire's decline, when it came, was gentler than any of them had braced themselves for, a slow softening rather than a sudden crisis, weeks where she slept more than she woke, where her voice grew quieter, where she stopped trying to sit at the table and instead let the world come to her, gathered around her bed. The hospice nurse, a calm, steady woman named Diane who had become almost a member of the family by then, prepared them gently for what was coming, teaching Daniel and Eleanor and even, in careful, age-appropriate language, the girls themselves, what to expect, how to be present for it without being afraid of it. On a quiet evening in late November, with rain falling softly against the windows and all 3 girls gathered close around her bed, along with Daniel, Eleanor, and Patrick, Claire opened her eyes one last time, found Daniel's face among the people surrounding her, and managed a small, unmistakable smile. "Thank you for finding your way back," she whispered. "Thank you for sending them to find me," Daniel said, his voice breaking on the words. "I would have spent the rest of my life not knowing what I was missing." Claire's gaze moved slowly across her daughters' faces, one at a time. Lily, Ivy, Hazel, something settling in her expression that looked, despite everything, almost like peace. "Take care of each other," she said softly. "All of you." She closed her eyes again, her breathing growing shallow, and then, sometime in the quiet hours before dawn, stopping altogether, gently, without struggle, surrounded by the family she had built first alone, and then, in the final months of her life, finally complete. The days that followed blurred together in the particular, exhausting fog of grief, a funeral attended by more people than Daniel had expected, neighbors and old friends, and co-workers from the pharmacy where Claire had worked for years, each of them sharing some small memory of a woman who had clearly touched more lives than she ever gave herself credit for. The girls stood through it with the same quiet dignity they had carried through every difficult moment since the diner, holding hands in a line, Lily on one end, Hazel on the other, Ivy steady in the middle, exactly the way they had stood the day they walked through the door and changed Daniel's life with 3 simple words. In the months that followed, the small house 2 streets from the flower shop slowly filled with new rhythms, grief folding itself quietly into the ordinary business of growing up, school projects and lost shoes, and arguments over whose turn it was to choose dinner. Eleanor came by most evenings, sometimes to help, sometimes just to sit in the kitchen and watch her granddaughters live the ordinary life their mother had fought so hard to give them. Patrick taught Hazel how to fix a bicycle chain one weekend, an echo of stories Claire used to tell about Daniel, that none of them mentioned out loud, but all of them felt anyway. A year after the afternoon in the diner, on a bright, ordinary Tuesday that held none of the strangeness of the one before it, Daniel sat at his kitchen table watching his 3 daughters argue cheerfully over a board game, and rolled up his sleeve without quite meaning to, glancing down at the anchor on his forearm, the faded letters spelling Claire's name beneath it. 2 weeks later, without telling the girls in advance, he visited the same tattoo shop where he and Claire had once gotten matching ink as foolish, hopeful 26-year-olds, and asked the artist to add something small beneath the anchor. 3 tiny birds in flight, 1 for each daughter, wings angled the same direction, moving forward together. When he showed the girls that evening, Hazel studied it with her usual careful attention before nodding, satisfied. "Now it makes sense," she said. "The anchor keeps you steady. The birds keep you moving." "Your mom used to say something like that," Daniel said, surprised, though he supposed he shouldn't have been. That some truths simply found their way down through a family, no matter how quietly they were carried. "She told us a lot of things," Lily said, smiling. "She said someday we'd understand all of it. I think we're starting to." Outside, the evening light slanted warm and gold through the kitchen window, catching on 3 pairs of eyes that held pieces of a woman none of them would ever stop missing, and on a man who had once believed his life had settled permanently into something small and quiet, before 3 girls in matching yellow raincoats walked through a diner door and said, with more weight than they could have possibly understood at the time, "Hello, sir." He had gone silent that day, certain, for one suspended moment, that his past had finally caught up with him. He understood now that it had not been his past at all. It had been his future, walking in 3 small steps ahead of schedule, waiting patiently for him to finally catch up.